a world where the sound of waves echoes off cliffs carved by ice, and the scent of pine, salt, and wood smoke fills the air. This is the world of the Vikings, not the fantasy of horned helmets and raging warriors, but the quieter, more complex truth of a people whose story spans centuries, sails, settlements, and sagas. Tonight, as you drift into rest, we journey through the Viking Age, from its earliest stirrings in the fjords of Scandinavia to the long shadows it casts over history. This is not a tale of endless battle, but a soft unraveling of the lives, landscapes, and legacies of the Norse world. Through gentle narration, you'll travel through time over mountain passes and frozen rivers, into mead halls and monasteries, across North Atlantic winds to shores unknown. The Viking Age, commonly defined as the period between 793 and 1066 CE, was an era of tremendous movement and transformation. It was not merely an age of raids, but of exploration, trade, craftsmanship, belief, and storytelling. The Norse peoples of what we now call Norway, Sweden, and Denmark ventured far beyond their homelands to Ireland and England, to Byzantium and Baghdad, to Greenland, and even North America. Yet for all their voyages abroad, their cultural world was deeply rooted in place, in kinship, in ritual, in the rhythms of the land and sea. In the sagas, the great prose tales passed down across generations, we hear echoes of this daily life. We hear of farmers and poets, of chieftains and seers, of explorers and queens. Their world was not only shaped by axes and longships, but by law councils and runestones, harvest feasts and winter storms, gods and ghosts and the constant turning of the seasons. And while the Norse left physical traces, ships buried beneath mounds of earth, coins scattered across Europe, timber-framed halls unearthed from the soil, their greatest legacy may be the ideas they carried: independence, adaptability, reverence for story, and the courage to cross into the unknown. As we journey together, you will hear of the origins of Viking society and the landscapes that shaped it, the meaning of raiding and trading, and how the Norse became navigators of the known world, the lives of everyday people, farmers, blacksmiths, women, and children whose voices echo quietly across time, the mythologies that filled the Norse imagination, from Yggdrasil to Ragnarok, the slow Christianization of Scandinavia, and the end of the old ways, and finally, how the Viking legacy lived on not just in history, but in memory, language, and the distant echoes of a carved wooden ship fading into the fog. Each chapter will be its own soft tide, guiding you gently through centuries of memory. When we explain terms like thing, the Norse assembly, or jarls, noble leaders, or skalds, poets of old, we will pause, letting meaning settle slowly in the mind, like snow upon a field. As we begin this exploration, it's worth remembering that the word Viking itself originally meant something different than we might imagine. In Old Norse, Vikingur referred not to a people, but to an activity, the act of voyaging, usually by sea, sometimes for war, but often for trade or discovery. To go a Viking was to leave home and take a risk, to sail out into the wide world, unsure of what you might find. And so, tonight, we go a Viking through time not to conquer, but to understand. You may drift into sleep along the way. That is perfectly fine. Your mind will catch the threads of these stories, even in dreams. Let the rhythm of history guide your breathing. Let the past become a quiet place of rest. When you are ready, we will set sail on calm waters. Toward Chapter 1, the origins of the Viking world, where forests stretch beyond the fjords and the dawn of the north begins. Let us now drift gently back, long before the first Viking ship ever touched the waves of the North Sea. The roots of the Norse world lie deep in the soil of Scandinavia, in its forests and fjords, its long winters and short summers, and in the quiet endurance of the people who lived there. We begin in the lands we now call Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, places shaped not by empires, but by terrain. The landscape is not gentle. Mountains rise like ancient sentinels, fjords carve their way inland like liquid fingers, and dense forests whisper with the rustle of pine needles. Winters are long and dark, summers brief and bright. In such a place, survival requires both toughness and creativity. The early peoples of Scandinavia, descendants of Germanic tribes and earlier prehistoric settlers, adapted their lives to this rhythm. By the late Iron Age, around the 5th to 8th centuries, CE Scandinavian society was beginning to take on the form it would keep for centuries. Communities were small, often centered around family farms. These farms were the heart of Norse life, not only places of work, but centers of culture and kinship. A typical Norse farm included longhouses made of timber and turf, where extended families lived together under a single sloping roof. Inside, the hearth was the center, the source of warmth, light, and stories. These early Norse societies were not united kingdoms, but rather a patchwork of chiefdoms, each ruled by a local noble called a jarl. Below the jarls were the carls, or free farmers and craftsmen, who made up the bulk of society. At the bottom were the thralls, or slaves, often prisoners taken in raids or warfare. This three-part social structure, jarl, carl, thrall, defined much of Viking society, though it was not entirely rigid. A clever or courageous man could rise, and even thralls could sometimes earn their freedom. At the center of community life was the thing, a kind of open-air assembly where free men gathered to settle disputes, create laws, and decide matters of local importance. The thing was not just a legal body, it was a social and spiritual event. It brought people together, reinforced customs, and affirmed the bonds of kin and clan. The Norse people were not literate in the traditional sense, at least, not in the early centuries, but they possessed a deep and intricate oral culture. Tales of ancestors, battles, and the gods were passed from mouth to mouth, generation after generation, by skalds, poets, who memorized vast epics and could recite them by firelight on cold nights. Their verses, composed in the tight structure of alliterative meter, would later become the foundation of the great Icelandic sagas. Religion, too, was woven into every part of daily life. The Norse were polytheistic, believing in a vast pantheon of gods and spirits. At the top was Odin, the one-eyed god of wisdom and war, who hung himself from the world tree Yggdrasil in pursuit of knowledge. Beside him stood Thor, god of thunder and protection, and Freya, goddess of love and fertility. These deities were not distant, they were part of the living world. A storm might be Thor's hammer striking the sky. A good harvest might be a gift from Freyr, the god of peace and prosperity. The Norse belief system was animistic, meaning that spirits were thought to inhabit natural features, mountains, trees, rivers, and stones. Offerings were left at sacred groves, and rituals were performed at hofs or wooden temples, where animal sacrifices were made in honor of the gods. These rites were not merely superstition, they were binding acts of relationship between people and the unseen forces that shaped their world. Time itself was felt differently. The Norse did not think in terms of years or decades, but of cycles, the cycle of seasons, the cycle of harvest and hunger, and the ultimate cycle of creation and destruction. Their mythology ends not in triumph, but in Ragnarok, a final battle in which even the gods must fall, and the world be reborn from fire and ice. As we linger in this early period, we must understand that the people we now call Vikings did not yet think of themselves that way. There was no single Viking identity, no single Scandinavian nation. Rather, there were kin-based communities scattered across the rugged north, speaking dialects of Old Norse, sharing a similar worldview, but living often in isolation. The sea connected them not just as a highway, but as a symbol. To live near water was to live near possibility. It is no coincidence, then, that one of the greatest technological achievements of the Norse people was the longship, a slender, shallow-draft vessel made of oak, fastened with iron rivets and flexible enough to ride the waves. The longship was not just a tool of war. It was a vessel of exploration, migration, and trade. It allowed the Norse to reach new lands, not only to take, but to give and learn. The longship is, in many ways, the heartbeat of the Viking Age. We will return to it again and again. And yet, before the age of voyages began, there was the home, the homestead, the hearth, the hall. Let us pause now and picture one such place. The hall is long and low, made of timber beams and sod walls. Smoke curls from a central hearth, rising to the thatched roof above. Children sleep under woolen blankets, while elders speak of frost giants and distant gods. A woman weaves beside the fire. A man carves runes into a wooden beam. Outside, snow falls softly on the stable roofs. Somewhere, an axe splits wood for the morning. Life is slow and harsh and sacred. This is the world that shaped the Viking spirit, not only one of strength and speed, but of patience and memory. A world where time moved in circles, and where even the boldest warrior knew the value of silence. As we near the end of this chapter, we begin to sense the quiet pressure building beneath the surface of Norse life. By the early 8th century, population pressures, limited farmland, and the lure of distant wealth began to stir the restless energy of the north. Young men looked beyond the fjords. Traders dreamed of gold and spices. Elders recalled tales of lands beyond the sea. The world was changing, and the Norse were about to change with it. In the next chapter, we set sail into that moment, the dawn of the Viking Age proper. It begins not with a whisper, but with a clash. The year 793, and the sudden, shocking raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne off the coast of Northumbria. But for now, let your thoughts rest with the sound of wind over water and fire crackling in the hearth. The Norse world is waiting. The waves grow louder now, steady and certain, as we sail into the next chapter of our journey, the dawn of the Viking Age in full. It is the year 793 CE, and a storm is gathering off the coast of northern England. On the small tidal island of Lindisfarne, a monastery stands in quiet solitude. The monks within are scholars and scribes, writing by candlelight, copying sacred texts, tending to prayer and silence. But then the silence is shattered. Ships appear on the horizon, sleek, narrow, dragon-headed vessels gliding swiftly over the waves. What happens next marks the symbolic beginning of the Viking Age, a violent and unexpected raid. The monastery is looted, its treasures stolen, its holy men killed or enslaved. News of the attack spreads like wildfire across Christendom, and the word Viking begins to echo with fear. Yet what the monks of Lindisfarne could not know, and what history would later reveal, is that the raid was not an isolated act of barbarism. It was the opening act of a far-reaching transformation, a wave of movement that would last nearly 3 centuries and carry Norse seafarers from the British Isles to the Black Sea, from Greenland to Baghdad. But before we continue, let us gently define a key word. To raid, in this context, means to launch a sudden attack on a location often for treasure, livestock, goods, or captives. Viking raids were usually swift, strategic, and targeted. Churches and monasteries were common targets, not only because they were lightly defended, but because they often held valuable objects, silver chalices, gold crucifixes, illuminated manuscripts, and finely crafted relics. These items were both valuable and portable, making them ideal prizes for fast-moving raiders. However, the early Viking Age was not defined by violence alone. In truth, most Norse expeditions combined raiding with trading. Alongside weapons, Viking ships carried furs, walrus ivory, timber, amber, and iron goods. Norse merchants traveled vast distances, establishing networks that stretched from the coasts of Ireland to the markets of the Abbasid Caliphate in the Islamic world. Archaeologists have found Arabic coins in Sweden, Frankish swords in Denmark, and Buddhist statues in Norse settlements. These are not the traces of mindless plunder, but of a people profoundly engaged with the world. Let us drift through some of these early destinations. In Ireland, Vikings established fortified coastal settlements, such as Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick ports, that would grow into major towns. In England, they raided deeper inland over time, navigating rivers such as the Thames and Humber, and eventually seizing large portions of the island. By the mid-9th century, they had carved out a vast region known as the Danelaw, a zone of Norse political and cultural control that included much of northern and eastern England. In Francia, the precursor to modern France, Vikings repeatedly attacked the city of Paris, sailing up the Seine River and demanding tribute from terrified rulers. The Frankish kings, unable to stop them, eventually granted them land in exchange for peace. This land became Normandy, the land of the Northmen, whose ruling class would one day produce William the Conqueror, himself of Viking descent. In Scotland and the Isle of Man, Viking chieftains established new power centers, often intermarrying with local populations. The rugged coastlines of the Hebrides, Orkney, and Shetland Islands offered natural harbors and strategic staging points. These islands would remain deeply Norse in character for centuries. To the east, Norse explorers moved inland via the river systems of modern Russia, trading and settling along the Volga and Dnieper rivers. These men, known as the Varangians, formed the backbone of early Rus society, the ancestors of both Russians and Ukrainians. Some even entered the service of the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople, where they became the elite Varangian guard, wielding axes in the halls of the Eastern Roman Empire. And to the north, Norse settlers began to look toward the open Atlantic. They discovered and colonized the Faroe Islands, then moved onward to Iceland, a land of volcanic plains, waterfalls, and hot springs, settled around 870 CE. Iceland would become a haven for skalds, law speakers, and storytellers, a place where the old oral traditions would eventually be written down in what we now call the Icelandic sagas. These journeys were made possible by the longship, the engineering marvel of the age. Longships were not only fast and flexible, but symmetrical at both ends, allowing them to reverse direction quickly. With shallow keels, they could travel far inland on rivers and be carried over land when needed. Crewed by dozens of men, they were both practical tools and symbols of status and power. But not all Viking leaders were raiders or traders. Some sought to become sea kings, rulers not of fixed territories, but of mobile, maritime domains. These kings, such as Harald Fairhair in Norway and Guthrum in England, used both force and diplomacy to carve out regions of control. Others, like Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan Ragnarsson, became semi-legendary figures, blending history and saga into larger-than-life tales of conquest. Still, the line between history and myth is soft in this age, like fog over the water. Let us pause now and imagine the life of a Viking at sea. The air is salt-rich and cold. The wind fills a square sail of red-striped wool. Men sit side by side, rowing when the wind dies, their backs aching in rhythm. Below the deck, provisions are stored: dried fish, mead, furs wrapped in oilcloth. The ship rocks gently, not unkindly. A raven flutters in its cage, ready to be released if the crew seeks land. And when the stars appear above, a helmsman reads them, as his ancestors read wind and wave. Life aboard a longship is not easy, but it is purposeful. There is honor in the voyage, and even in the hardship. It's important to remember that most Norse expeditions were not massive invasions. They often involved small groups, perhaps 30 or 40 men operating with speed and precision. What made the Vikings so formidable was not their numbers, but their mobility, coordination, and adaptability. They could appear and disappear like mist. They could raid one year and settle the next. As time went on, many Viking groups began to establish permanent settlements, integrating with local populations. Norsemen married local women, learned new languages, adopted new tools, and in time, even new religions. This adaptability, the ability to be both raider and trader, outsider and neighbor, is perhaps the defining trait of the Viking Age. But with expansion came challenges. Rivalries emerged between Viking chieftains. Tensions grew between old traditions and new influences. And in many places, the spread of Christianity began to reshape the spiritual landscape of the Norse world. We will explore that transformation in a later chapter. For now, as we glide across the waters of the 9th and 10th centuries, we begin to see the Viking world at its height. A vast maritime network stretching from Vinland to Byzantium, a people feared, admired, and often misunderstood. And yet, even as ships set sail for distant shores, the beating heart of the Norse world remained at home in the hall, the hearth, and the rhythms of daily life. In the next chapter, we turn our gaze inward to the lives of ordinary people, farmers and weavers, blacksmiths and healers, children and elders. What was it like to grow up in the Viking Age? What did people eat, wear, believe, and dream? We'll explore those quiet corners next where history whispers and sleep begins to settle in. As the sea breeze fades and the sails are furled, we step gently ashore, not onto a battlefield or the docks of a foreign port, but into the quiet heart of Norse daily life. It is here, in the meadows and kitchens, in the longhouses and blacksmith forges, that the rhythm of Viking society truly unfolds. Let us walk through a typical Norse village in the 10th century somewhere in Denmark, Norway, or Iceland. The landscape is rugged, often framed by fjords or dense forests, with hills that roll into grazing pastures and fields of barley and rye. Chickens cluck near doorways. A goat bleats in the distance. Smoke rises slowly from turf-roofed houses, merging with the mist of early morning. And at the center of the settlement stands the longhouse, the core of both family and community life. A longhouse is exactly what its name suggests: long, wooden, and low. It may stretch up to 25 or 30 meters in length, with thick timber frames and walls insulated with wattle and daub, a blend of woven twigs and clay. Sod or turf is often laid across the roof for extra warmth. Inside, the space is dim and smoky, lit only by small windows and an open hearth in the center. But despite the gloom, there is comfort here. The hearth is the beating heart of the longhouse, a narrow, stone-lined fire pit that provides warmth, light, and a place to cook meals. Above it, smoke escapes slowly through a roof vent, coating the rafters in soot. Beds line the sides of the house, made from straw and animal skins. People sleep close together for warmth, with children nestled between parents, and elders wrapped tightly in cloaks. Each household is a busy, self-sustaining unit. The family structure is extended, often including not only parents and children, but grandparents, aunts, uncles, and even loyal retainers or servants. Roles are clearly divided but interdependent. Men typically farm, hunt, fish, and build, while women tend to the hearth, weave cloth, prepare food, and manage the household, though these roles could overlap depending on need. Let us pause now to picture a day in the life of a Viking woman. Her name may be Sigrid. She rises before dawn, stirs the embers of the hearth, and begins kneading bread. She checks on a pot of skyr, a kind of sour yogurt, and feeds chickens, while the dew still glistens on the grass. Later she might sit at her loom, weaving wool into fabric dyed with lichen or madder root. Her keys hang at her waist, a symbol of her authority over the household. She manages stores of grain and meat, makes decisions about trade, and raises children with stories and song. She is not merely domestic, she is central. Marriage in Norse society is not just romantic, it's political and economic. Alliances are formed through unions, and women are often given bride prices, negotiated between families. Yet Norse women enjoy more freedom than in many contemporary societies. They can inherit property, file for divorce, and even lead farms or voyages when necessary. This balance reflects a society rooted in both practicality and tradition. Outside, men till the land with simple wooden plows or fish from slender boats, casting nets woven by hand. Boys learn early to handle axes, not just for war, but for felling trees, building homes, and crafting tools. Blacksmiths work near smoky forges, hammering red-hot iron into nails, hinges, or blades. Carpenters shape oars and roof beams. Life is physical, but it is not brutal. It is deeply rhythmic. The food of the Viking Age is hearty and seasonal. In summer, people forage for berries and herbs, cloudberries, lingonberries, sorrel, nettle. In autumn, livestock are slaughtered and meat is smoked or salted for the long winter. Meals are simple: porridge made from barley or oats, stew thickened with root vegetables, dried fish, flatbreads, and ale. Honey is the main sweetener and also the base for mead, the celebrated fermented drink of the Norse. Let us drift now into the sounds of this world. The clink of iron on stone, the soft rush of the stream that powers a watermill, the laughter of children chasing a carved wooden toy, the hum of voices sharing tales in the firelight stories of Thor's hammer, Odin's wisdom, and far-off lands shimmering with gold. These oral traditions pass knowledge from generation to generation. The skalds, poets, and bards memorize vast epics, preserving culture in verse. We pause now to define another term. A skald is a Norse poet, often attached to a chieftain's court, who composes and recites poems celebrating victories, lineages, and mythic tales. Their verse is intricate and layered with metaphors known as kennings, like calling the sea a whale road or a sword a wound hoe. These word weavings are both entertainment and memory. In addition to storytelling, law and order is maintained through public assemblies called things, pronounced tings. At a thing, free men gather to settle disputes, propose laws, and conduct trials. Justice is often restorative, not punitive. Compensation, called weregild, may be paid in silver or livestock, depending on the severity of the offense. This system reflects a society that values honor and reputation over state authority. Children grow up surrounded by both hardship and affection. Boys and girls alike learn practical skills: weaving, carving, reading the sky for signs of change. Some may be fostered to other families, building bonds of alliance. Games and riddles sharpen minds, while roughhousing prepares the body. Education is oral, experiential, communal. And religion? That hums softly beneath everything. The Norse pantheon is not distant and aloof. It lives in the world, in thunder and storm, in the whispering forest, in the gleam of a sword. The gods of Asgard, Odin the All-Father, Thor the Thunderer, Freya the goddess of love and war, are revered not as infallible beings, but as powerful, flawed, and deeply intertwined with human fate. Shrines and carved figurines stand on household altars. Sacred groves and stones mark places of worship. Sacrifices, sometimes of animals, rarely of humans, are made to seek favor or guidance. There are no temples like in Rome or Egypt. Worship is woven into life, into feast and fire, oath and offering. Let us close our eyes for a moment and imagine evening in a Norse village. The sky is fading to lavender. A dog lies curled near the hearth. Someone plucks at a lyre made from driftwood and sinew. A grandmother tells of a giant who swallowed the sun and the day Thor wrestled the world serpent. Outside, the stars prick the sky, and somewhere in the distance, an owl calls. It is peaceful, but alive. It is quiet, but purposeful. Daily life in the Viking world was not solely preparation for war or adventure. It was full and rich, shaped by cooperation, storytelling, and a deep relationship with land and sea. It is in this domestic world, this world of small gestures and shared meals, that the Norse spirit found its endurance. As we leave this chapter, gently and slowly, we prepare to turn toward transformation, because change is coming. From across the seas, a new belief is spreading, one of crosses and saints, of churches and sacred texts. It whispers through trade routes and royal courts, and soon it will alter the very structure of Norse identity. In our next chapter, we explore the coming of Christianity to the Viking world, not as a sudden event, but as a long, complex weaving of belief and politics. But for now, let the sounds of daily life, the fire crackle, the spinning wheel, the hush of story ease us toward sleep. As we gently drift onward, leaving behind the smoky hearths and frostbitten meadows of traditional Norse life, we enter a new chapter, one of transformation, belief, and the reshaping of identity. The Norse world is on the cusp of a quiet revolution. It does not arrive with fanfare, but with whispers carried in the words of monks, the coins of traders, and the ambitions of kings. This is the story of the Christianization of the Norse world. To understand this great shift, we must first recall that Viking society was not isolated. Far from it. As raiders and merchants traveled through Francia, England, Ireland, and even as far as the Mediterranean, they encountered Christian communities, some humble and monastic, others rich and powerful. Early on, these encounters were marked by violence. The infamous raid on Lindisfarne in 793, a monastery on the northeastern coast of England, sent shockwaves through Christian Europe. But for the Norse, it was simply a raid like many others. They saw no distinction between a monastery and a wealthy town. Yet in time, these contacts grew more complex. Some Vikings began to settle. Some took Christian wives. Some even offered protection to churches and monasteries. This transition from raider to resident is a key moment. As Norsemen began to integrate into Christian societies in Danelaw, England, in Normandy, and in Ireland, they found that adopting the local religion could offer political and social advantages. And so, Christianity entered the Norse world not by conquest, but by curiosity and convenience, and later, by conviction. Let us now visit Norway, where the story of conversion takes on a royal tone. In the early 10th century, a chieftain named Håkon the Good, raised in England, returned to Norway with Christian beliefs. He tried to introduce the faith to his people, but faced resistance. The old gods were too deeply woven into tradition. Sacrifices, feasts, and seasonal rituals held emotional power. Håkon's reforms were short-lived. It would take another century and a different approach for Christianity to truly take root. Enter Olaf Tryggvason. A charismatic and forceful king, Olaf ruled from 995 to 1000. He had traveled widely, been baptized in England, and returned to Norway with both a sword and a cross. Olaf's conversion campaign was not gentle. He destroyed pagan temples, forced baptisms, and punished those who clung to the old ways. His tactics were dramatic, but his reign short. After his death at the Battle of Svolder, Christianization slowed, but it had begun. Later, Olaf Haraldsson, known to history as Saint Olaf, would continue the effort. Unlike his predecessor, Saint Olaf tried to blend faith with law, encouraging the church to establish itself alongside royal authority. When he died in 1030, he was quickly venerated as a martyr and saint, not just for his faith, but for his role in unifying Norway. Through these figures, we see how conversion was not merely religious, it was deeply political. To be Christian was to join a broader European world, one of writing, diplomacy, and kingship. Christian monarchs had access to bishops, scribes, and continental alliances. They could issue coins bearing crosses. They could frame their rule as divinely sanctioned. In this way, Christianity became a tool of both unification and legitimacy. But conversion was not instant. Let us now look to Iceland, where the story takes a more peaceful path. Icelanders, with their love of law and consensus, debated the issue at the National Althing in the year 1000. A wise law speaker named Thorgeir Ljósvetningagodi took a day and night to reflect beneath a fur cloak. The next morning, he emerged and declared that Iceland should adopt Christianity, but with compromises. People could still practice the old ways in private. This balance allowed for a smooth transition, preserving peace. Such stories remind us that conversion was not a single moment, but a process. It often took generations. In Sweden, Christianization came later and more gradually. Pagan traditions held firm, especially in rural areas. Uppsala, a great pagan temple, remained active well into the 11th century. Even as Christian kings ruled from stone churches, the people continued to offer sacrifices in sacred groves. Over time, however, the church infrastructure took root with stone cathedrals, Latin texts, and Christian holidays layered atop older seasonal festivals. Yule became Christmas. Spring rites became Easter. The rhythm of the year shifted, but traces of the past remained. Let us pause now and reflect on what was gained and what was lost. The gods of the Norse Odin, Thor, Freya faded into memory. Their stories were preserved not by priests, but by poets and scribes. Thanks to Christian monks like Snorri Sturluson, we have the prose Edda and poetic Edda, written records of Norse myths compiled in the 13th century. Ironically, it was the Christian world that helped preserve the pagan one. The runes' angular letters carved into stone and wood were replaced by the Latin alphabet. Oral traditions gave way to written law codes and charters. Wooden temples, known as hofs, were dismantled or converted into churches. But the people adapted. Faith did not erase culture, it evolved it. In time, Norse Christianity took on its own flavor. Churches were decorated with dragon head carvings, psalms were sung in Old Norse, and saints like Olaf were honored alongside lingering folk beliefs. The old gods faded, but they were never truly forgotten. Let us return for a moment to a small village at twilight. A family gathers for evening prayer. A wooden cross hangs where once a Thor's hammer might have rested. Yet outside, someone still leaves a bowl of milk for the Nisea house spirit just in case. The church bell chimes gently. A candle flickers. Somewhere in the mind of an old woman, stories of Odin and Frigg still echo. This is how religions pass not as flames, but as embers, glowing faintly in memory. Christianity changed the Norse world, but it did not erase it. It layered new meanings over old symbols. It offered new paths to kingship, community, and salvation. And it prepared Scandinavia for its next great chapter, not of raiders or settlers, but of rulers and builders. In our next chapter, we journey into the later Viking Age, a time of kingdoms rising, conquests abroad, and the fading of the old ways. But for now, let this quiet transformation from hammer to cross, from hall to church, guide us deeper into sleep, where faith and memory gently intertwine. As we drift into the twilight of the Viking Age, the air grows thick with change. What began as a storm of sails and swords now softens into a tide of transformation, of kingdoms rising, raids fading, and seafaring ambitions turning into settled rule. This is the story of the final chapters of the Viking Age, when Norse power reached its greatest geographical span and then slowly ebbed away into legend. Let us first turn our gaze westward, across the cold Atlantic waters, toward the windswept coasts of Greenland and beyond. Around the year 985, a bold seafarer named Eric the Red led a group of settlers from Iceland to a vast icy island. Despite its harsh terrain, he named it Greenland, a clever bit of branding, perhaps to entice more settlers. These Greenland colonies, clinging to the southern coast, endured for centuries. They raised cattle, built turf houses, and constructed small wooden churches. Life was difficult but tenacious. It was Eric's son, the famed Leif Erikson, who would sail even farther. Around the year 1000, Leif ventured west from Greenland and reached a strange wooded land that he called Vinland. This was almost certainly part of what we now know as Newfoundland in present-day Canada. The Norse built a short-lived settlement at a place now called L'Anse aux Meadows. It remains the earliest known European presence in the Americas, some 500 years before Columbus. Here, the Norse explored, hunted, and perhaps traded with local indigenous peoples, but they did not stay long. Distance, supply difficulties, and occasional conflict made Vinland unsustainable. After a few years, the settlement was abandoned, and the Norse withdrew to Greenland and Iceland. Still, the memory lingered in sagas and whispers of a land across the Western Sea. As we drift back eastward, let us explore how the Viking world reshaped Europe. In the British Isles, Norse influence remained deep. In England, the region known as the Danelaw, governed by Viking settlers, gradually merged with Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Language, law, and landholding interwove. Towns like York, once Norse strongholds, became bustling centers of mixed culture. Eventually, a powerful Viking-descended king, Canute the Great, rose to rule over not just Denmark and Norway, but England itself. From 1016 to 1035, Canute presided over a North Sea empire. He ruled with wisdom, embraced Christianity, and governed with the help of native English nobles. His reign marked the high point of Viking political power in Europe. In Ireland, Norse towns like Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick became vital ports and trade hubs. Originally founded by raiders, these cities matured into multicultural marketplaces. Norse families intermarried with Gaelic clans, and the Norse Gael identity was born neither entirely Viking nor entirely Irish, but something uniquely in between. Even in France, the legacy of Viking expansion endured. In 911, a Viking chieftain named Rollo was granted land by the Frankish king in exchange for loyalty and defense against further Viking attacks. This land became Normandy, and its Norse inhabitants gradually adopted French language and customs. Yet the martial spirit of their ancestors remained, and in 1066, Rollo's descendant, William the Conqueror, would sail across the Channel to claim the English crown at the Battle of Hastings. Thus, even as Viking raids waned, their legacy surged forward through dynasties and domains. Why, then, did the Viking Age end? The answer, like the sea itself, is many-layered. First, internal consolidation. The once fragmented lands of Scandinavia began to coalesce into more centralized kingdoms. Denmark, Norway, and Sweden emerged as distinct polities. Kings sought order, taxes, and borders, all of which discouraged the unpredictable nature of raiding. Second, external resistance. As European kingdoms strengthened, they developed more effective defenses. Monasteries built stone walls, coastal towns organized militias, fortresses dotted riverbanks. The easy plunder of the 8th and 9th centuries became harder to reach. Third, and most profoundly, came Christianization. As discussed in our previous chapter, Christianity reshaped Norse values, rituals, and ambitions. It discouraged raiding fellow Christians, encouraged the building of churches, and promoted stability over conquest. With the cross came the quill, and with the quill came laws, chronicles, and treaties. And yet, the end was not abrupt. There was no single moment when a Viking raised his axe for the last time. Rather, it was a slow dimming, like the sun sinking into a northern sea. In Sweden, Norse expeditions into Eastern Europe continued well into the 11th century. Known as Varangians, these traders and warriors established routes along the great rivers of Russia, reaching the Byzantine Empire. Some even served as elite bodyguards to the emperors of Constantinople, in what was known as the Varangian Guard, a final echo of Viking prowess. Back in the homelands, the Viking lifestyle gave way to farming, commerce, and governance. Timber longships rested in grassy fields, their keels rotting into memory. Oral sagas, once told around flickering fires, were written down in careful script. And in Greenland, the last outposts faded. By the 15th century, the Norse settlements there had vanished, their churches silent, their turf homes abandoned to snow and wind. Whether due to climate change, isolation, or dwindling trade, the end came quietly. Yet the Viking spirit never fully disappeared. Let us pause here, at the shores of Scandinavia, and imagine a child in the 12th century born not to raiders, but to farmers and churchgoers. He listens as his grandfather speaks of distant voyages, gods with one eye or thunderhammers, of dragons on ship prows and sunstones that guided men across seas. These stories are no longer lived, but they live on. They become legend, and that, perhaps, is the most enduring legacy of the Viking Age, not the raids or conquests, but the stories, the sense of daring, exploration, and resilience, the belief that the world was open to those brave enough to sail it. In our final chapter, we will step back and look at the legacy of the Viking Age, how it shaped the modern world, how it is remembered, and why it still captures our imaginations. But for now, let the last echoes of axes and sails settle into the soft sands of time. Let the waves rock us gently. The Viking Age is ending, but its spirit, like the northern wind, still stirs. As we drift toward the close of our voyage, the sails of history now far behind us, we step softly into the realm of memory, a place where myth and fact intertwine, where echoes of the Viking world ripple through the present. This final chapter is not about battles or conquests. It is about legacy, how the Norse world endures in our language, our stories, our symbols, and our sense of who we are. The Viking Age may have ended nearly 1,000 years ago, but the fascination with its people never truly faded. Instead, like a glowing ember in the ashes, it rekindled in new and surprising forms. Let us begin with language. The Vikings left deep marks on the tongues of Europe. In England, especially in the former Danelaw regions, the Old Norse language mingled with Old English. Many everyday words in modern English, sky, window, knife, egg, take, and even the pronoun they have Norse roots. Place names, too, preserve their presence. Any town ending in -by, -thorpe, or -thwaite like Grimsby, Scunthorpe, or Applethwaite speaks of Viking settlers. These names are like footprints, quiet and enduring. And in Iceland, the Old Norse language evolved into modern Icelandic, remarkably close to what Vikings once spoke. Icelanders can still read the medieval sagas in their original form, a living bridge to the Viking mind. Now let us visit those sagas, the rich prose epics that form the literary heart of the Norse legacy. Written down in the 13th and 14th centuries, these sagas preserved not only myths of gods and giants, but also human stories, feuds, voyages, betrayals, and enduring love. The saga of the Volsungs, Njal's saga, and Egil's saga are windows into a world both strange and familiar, where honor and family shaped fate, and where the supernatural brushed against the everyday. These tales influenced later European literature and inspired authors from J.R.R. Tolkien to Neil Gaiman. The Norse cosmos, with its world tree Yggdrasil, its gods of war and wisdom, and its final battle of Ragnarok, remains vivid in popular culture. Today, Viking imagery appears in movies, books, video games, and even sports teams. Helmets with horns, though historically inaccurate, have become symbols of Norse identity. Television series dramatize Viking lives, often blending historical detail with modern drama. But amid this fascination, it is important to pause to separate the truth from the myth. Vikings were not a monolith. They were not only warriors or raiders. They were farmers, traders, poets, blacksmiths, navigators, and kings. Their world was rich in law, custom, faith, and artistry. In recent years, historians and archaeologists have worked to correct older, simplified views. They've highlighted the roles of women not just as wives, but as landowners, priestesses, travelers, and, in rare cases, warriors. The discovery of a richly furnished grave in Birka, Sweden, once thought to belong to a male chieftain, turned out to be that of a woman buried with sword and shield. Her presence suggests complexities we are only beginning to understand. Viking society also had darker sides, including slavery, known as thralldom, and brutal justice. Their honor culture could lead to cycles of revenge. And while we admire their craftsmanship and daring, we must also acknowledge their violence. Yet, in facing this complexity, we come closer to the truth, a truth that honors the full spectrum of the Norse experience. Their seafaring innovations changed the medieval world. Their ships, light, fast, and versatile, influenced naval design for centuries. Their trade networks connected distant lands, from the Arctic Circle to the Middle East. Their stories, once sung in smoky halls, continue to be read, studied, and adapted across the globe. In Scandinavia today, the Viking past is a source of both heritage and identity. Museums in Oslo, Copenhagen, and Stockholm house exquisite artifacts, ships, jewelry, runestones, and wood carvings. Festivals and reenactments bring Viking history to life. Scholars translate ancient texts, while geneticists trace Norse migrations in modern DNA. But the most enduring Viking legacy may be psychological, a deep human admiration for exploration, resilience, and self-reliance. In their sagas, we hear a voice that still speaks to us, bold, poetic, unflinching. A belief that one must face fate with open eyes. That life is short, but action echoes. That even in the face of Ragnarok, the end of all things, one does not flee, but stands firm. These values are not bound by time or geography. They are human. Let us now close our eyes and return, for the last time, to the world of the north. The air is crisp. The stars glimmer above snow-dusted fjords. A longhouse glows with firelight. Inside, a child listens, as an elder recites the tale of Sigurd, the dragon slayer, of Odin's ravens, of the sea kings who sailed to the edge of the world. Outside, the aurora shimmers across the sky silent, like the ghosts of longships. And in your quiet mind, you carry the echoes of oars on water, of wind in sails, of voices long faded but never forgotten. The Viking Age is over, but its story, your story, lives on. Good night, and may your dreams sail smoothly through the stars.